Human Sexuality, Edition 2, by Roger R. Hawk. Copyright 2010. Student Edition, and these are the codes for if you ever want to look into it. Chapter 1, Studying Human Sexuality, a brief overview. Today's topic will be the history timeline, with a brief overview over everything that has happened in the last 150 years. The first patent for any kind of contraception was done in 1846 here in America of the diaphragm. In 1873, Congress passed the Comstock Act, outlawing distribution of any information that they deemed immoral or unreasonable. This is basically the Christian movement not allowing things such as porn magazines to be shipped online or anything that they felt could hurt sexuality, which included contraceptions. In 1874, Women's Christian Temperance Union founded and opposed the men's drinking of alcohol and engaging in immoral acts, meaning they did not want prostitution and they didn't want their men to be coming home drunk and leaving the women with no money to buy food for the household. Because remember, in 1874, women were not allowed to work, and those that were working were in the sex trade the majority of the time. In 1897, Havelock Ellis published the first books about sex. Basically, this was just a book series that people were riveted by. There were no pictures or graphic images in it. It was only a guide letting people know that it's normal, natural, and can be pleasurable. In 1909, Sigmund Freud lectures the first time adding sex to his lectures. In 1960, Margaret Sanger, arrested and jailed for operating the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn, signaling the change for sexual norms, marked separation for sex for reproduction of women. Basically, what happened was she was an advocate for women to get abortions and or get birth control. She thought that women's health was very highly dependent upon it, and it has been proven that it has been, because before 1960, when women had no choice, they would do things to give self-abortions, like purposely throwing themselves downstairs and or sticking things up into their vagina, such as hangers or other things, to get the baby out of their body, because at this point they already have sometimes 6, 7, 8 kids at home and no ways to take care of them, or very little, and they're unable to take care of additional children. And at that time, they did have an adoption system, but the system, because they also had orphanages at that time, was very unreliable, and you did not know if your child was going to be placed into a good home. So this was a very needed thing. Margaret Sanger is a very very good person to have and know about. Moving down the timeline, the 1920s spread of the automobile offers privacy and independence for dating couples. This mainly affected teenagers. This is when we started seeing the teen parents who were getting pregnant. The mothers and the daughters were disappearing during mid-late pregnancies, having the babies and giving them up for adoption. And this is how most adoptions happened up until later, when sex was more normalized and women weren't sent off to have their babies. In 1923, John Kellogg became the president of the Battle Creek Sanctuary, promotes plain foods such as corn flakes in order to prevent sexual feelings and discourage masturbation. This was the beginning of the Kellogg's brand of cereals and other various foods that they offer. This was a false claim. Most of the products out there at the time were false claims. They were things along the lines of rhino horn, grind down, and able to make the man more sexually aroused more easily, and things of that nature. So this is another false claim that was made. But because his claim was in a sexual nature, it ended up making him billions of dollars and now time money. Moving on to 1934, the appeals court overturned the ruling of James Joyce Ulysses as obscene, signaling liberation for obscenity laws. Basically what that means is that the book, Ulysses, was considered because there is a scene in there where he takes his wife and he does have sex with her, but it is labeled and written in a way that it doesn't say the penis inserts into the vagina. It's in a very sensual way with very open door analogies, and that it was considered obscene because of the laws that were acted earlier in the 1800s. So in 1936, the U.S. federal court overturns the Comstock Act of anti-conception laws. This was a big positive. This allowed the 1916 Margaret Sanger Institute to be able to ship birth control to parents or to women who felt that they had enough children, they did not want children. They also were given options on being able to choose what their own bodies were able to do. Lower down here, 1934, the Catholic Church forms the legal laying of decency to evaluate the rape films of Hollywood, responds by reducing sexual content of movies. This was the start of the two-bed movement, meaning that anything that was seen on TV that did not have, that had a couple, a man and a woman, even if they were not married, if they were a man and a woman and they were in a bedroom, for whatever the reason, they had to have two beds in the room. And if they happened to lean over to kiss each other goodnight or say goodbye or whatever the case may be, 1 foot of each participant had to be on the floor at all times. Meaning that it was very awkward positions, and they usually, like, you can watch the old I Love Lucy shows and see that example of that. Going up the timeline, this is a little further. Okay. 1942, Planned Parenthood Foundation was founded. This was the first clinic for abortion that basically the doctors were giving abortions and the law allowed it. That doesn't mean that people liked it, but they still allowed it. In 1948, the publication of Kidney Institute Sexual Behavior in Human Males sold 200,000 copies and was in the New York Times for 27 weeks. This was the first book that actually shown pictures of the male reproduction system, not only on the outside, but on the inside as well. And it was written in a textbook-like manner and sold, obviously, lots of copies. Remember, in 1948, there was only about 2 million people in the United States total. So this is 10% of the population had this book at that time. The existence of the zone and the erogenous feelings on the walls of the vagina suggested that Ernest Grafenberg, known as the G-spot. The G-spot is still a myth today. There is a spot in a woman that can be sexually aroused. There's actually two separate spots, but that we'll get into later. In 1953, Hugh Hefner publishes Playboy. He basically put all of his fortune online, and when I say online, I mean on either the business of the magazine failing or succeeding. He was the very first magazine to publish nude pictures and making him very popular with the men. Christiana Johnson, among the first to undergo a male-to-female sex change operation. Above, you see the picture of her at this point, and this was a huge deal that people could change their identity and become transgender. The publication of the Kersey Institute Sexual Behavior for Humans for Females sold 250,000 copies. So about 3 years earlier, they had the men's, now they have the women's. And this was, again, a huge hit, which about the 10% of the population also owned that. 1960. The peace and flower time of the country where hippies ran rampant. Feminine mystique, Betty Freeman published the signals beginning of the feminist movement, and the Food and Drug Administration approves the first oral contraception, meaning that this is the first pill for birth control. They have since then had many kinds of birth controls published and made legal, but this was the very first. In 1966, another book was published by Masters of Johnson. This is not Johnson & Johnson, the company. This is a different Johnson. This is a married couple, and they basically would have people come into their lab in their university where they worked, and they watched people have sex. They took notes, and they everything from foreplay to actual sexual contact. 1969, police clash violence was stonewalled in a gray bar in the New York Greenwich Village, marked the beginning of the gay rights movement. This was when people started coming out, even though it's been said that there are approximately 1 to 5% of the population as being gay currently. It is unknown the exact amount, because the problem is that people still have this stigma of being gay because of religious connotations in their environment. And because of that, we don't have an exact number or percentage of people in the United States that say they're gay, and that, in my knowledge, have been born that way. But that's another topic for later. 1967, another book was published. 1975, there was a law about hiring gays and lesbians that was later overturned. At this point, the DSM, which is the book written by psychologists about mental disorders, had listed that being gay was a mental disorder. So, if you did come out as being gay, you could have been sent off to one of the reformation camps or re-education camps, where they would not let you leave, until you basically became, like, if you're a woman, you had to like a man, and if you're a man, you had to like a woman. So this left a lot of people, especially in the 70s, wanting to be in the closet because they had no choice. Otherwise, society would not accept them for who they were. In 1969, Hugh rock concert at Woodstock marked the culmination of the hippie free love movement. This is when we literally saw people out in the fields, out in the open, having sex, and nobody did anything, said anything, and the adults were pretty pissed off about it at that time. But they, at the same time, didn't have the laws because they were overdone in the 20s. So now the laws were overturned, and now there is nothing stopping these people from having sex wherever they wanted. 1970 featured film Boys in the Band was the first released movie about gay people. Rocky Horror Picture Show was the second movie. That one got more underground. And when it first came out, and this is a story that I had from my father, what ended up happening was the Rocky Horror Picture Show came out, and it was such a success. By the time it was 1975, him and his buddies wanted to see the show because it was so popular, and there were several famous actors in the movie. What ended up happening was when he went to the store, he had to go to an underground video store, which they did have them back in the 60s and 70s, but they were not in the best of neighborhoods and hard to find. And he was looking for specifically this show, even though that they're not technically having sex in the video and there's not pornography. The video does have people in skimpy clothes. It does have men wearing female lingerie, things of that nature, but it doesn't have any actual sexual acts of that nature. There is a sex scene, but it's a minor one, and it's not considered pornography because it's not the penis inserted in the vagina as the main scene, and you don't see that at all. You just see the undertone shadows of it. In any case, when he went in 1975 to buy this movie, he ended up having to spend $100, which in 1975 was close to about $600 in 2015 money. And 1973 was when they actually stopped the APA, when the DSM book took that heterosexuality was a disorder out of the book. And then the historic Roe versus Wade about abortion was in 1973, and we will talk about that in great detail more. The Hyatt Report published detailed sexual fantasies and behaviors of women. This is a controversial report that we will go over more detail later. Basically, it states that women did have sexual fantasies, because before this point it was thought that women had no sexual fantasies and that we were only here to have babies, and what we wanted and our needs and desires were unnecessary for any of the functions. This was also around the time that the act of sexual mutilation on women, where they would cut the clitoris off of the woman to prevent them from having sexual fantasies and cheating on their husbands, was getting to the point that in popular culture all over the world they stopped doing. This was done, and not to everybody, but it was done to women, the same way that this getting men castrated or getting men as infants having their penises snipped and having a clean cut. And the U.S. Civil Service Administration lifts the ban of hiring the gays, so it took them about 5 years to realize that that was a bad move, and it was overturned. That was the Woodstock. Let's see here. 1970. We already did those. Okay, now we're moving on to 1978. Oh, here we go. The birth of the first IVF baby was born. And it made huge news because people were speculating that people born this way were not going to be able to have children themselves. People born this way were going to come out deformed. And this was the start of the IVF movement. 1979, California, first state classified forced sex by husband and wife as rape. This is a big turn and a big progress for the movement of sexual revolution for women. Meaning that before this point in time, if a man, because he is married to his wife, chooses to have sex with her and she, for whatever reason, does not want to have sex because she has a headache, because she's pregnant, because the doctor told her not to, because she doesn't feel like it, whatever the reason, doesn't matter. The man could have sex with her, and the wife, if she chose not to have sex with him, the man literally could beat the wife into submission, have sex with her, and move on. And the wife could do and say nothing. It didn't matter if the baby was lost. It was the woman's fault, even though the man raped her. In 1981, the first unexplained deaths of the infection seen among gay men in San Francisco that later became known as AIDS. This was only because the transmission of AIDS from the penis to the vagina or the penis to the anus, depending on how it was spread, is easier spread than vagina to men. Men did have AIDS that were heterosexual, and it was found that there were equal numbers of heterosexuals and gay population of those who had the virus. But because of this, people who were gay at that time in the 80s were seen as lesser people, and it didn't matter if you had AIDS or not, you were seen as having AIDS if you came out saying that you were gay. 1983, the IVF was actually diagnosed in 1991. Oops, down here. This was a big to-do. Pee Wee Herman's show, which you can find on YouTube, was a very popular show. And it was a show for children, and this is something that at the time they didn't have the internet, so you could not watch pornography in the privacy of your own home. Well, this was a big deal about Pee-wee getting arrested for masturbating in a sex house. It was the right place for him to do it, but because he was a child star, that's why. And he entertained children, even though he wasn't a child. President Clinton did the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which was a big failure. The FDA approves another condom for females, which ended up working, but it was very cumbersome and unnatural to use. It didn't add to the sexual experience. The condom takes away from the male's feelings, but you can still feel. The females, when they had this in, it literally felt like a plastic baggie being shoved up in the vagina. It was not a pleasant thing, and eventually they do still sell it, but it's not nearly as popular as the pill. In 1994, another book was published. in 1997. This is the first popular TV person to come out as being gay. She has a widely successful TV show now, which is a talk show type. This is the first in 1998 when Viagra was made. This was a big deal. The pills, when they first came out in 1998, cost on average $150 a pill. And even to this day, to my knowledge, the medical community and insurance will not cover the cost of it. The pills have gone down to cost in about $50 a pill, but back then when it first came out, it was very expensive. Also in 1998 was when President Clinton had the "I did not have sexual contact with that woman" speech. Let's see here. And then we have 1997. Oh, nope, we're down to 99. I was right. HPV was found to be a cause. Later on, they've come out with a vaccine, but that's not quite yet. That's a vaccine that children get nowadays. Another TV series comes out. This actually has openly gay characters on it, and it was widely successful because it was done in a very relaxed setting. The 2002, the drug that they're talking about here was basically they put it into your drinks, and women were being raped, and they didn't know why women were having these things, because when they took this drug, you were basically knocked out. You don't remember what happened, but the thing is that it kind of puts you in a hypnotic state, so that if with help and assistance, you're able to walk out of the building, and when people ask you a question, you respond with vague uh-huhs or yeses or yeah and grunts and moans and things of that nature, letting people know that you may be drunk, but you're okay. This was not being drunk. This was another issue. The problem is that this drug also came out of the system within 24 hours. So if the woman was raped, taken to an apartment, and then when she woke up the following morning and she hadn't gone straight to the police or the doctors, the drug could be out of her system by the time she realized that something fishy had happened, or that she had had rape, or in some cases, women ended up pregnant after the fact. The U.S. Supreme Court strikes down all Texas sodomy laws. That basically means that the sodomy laws were not allowing men to have sex with each other. Women having sex with each other, they did not necessarily care about, and actually most of those cases, if it did come up in court, were overthrown, or the judges, because most of them were males, actually thought that was kind of cool, and why didn't the husbands join in, type thing. Okay, down to 2004. That was overturned, that act, and another drug for sexual contact was made, for like Viagra. So now men had choices. And this was the morning after pill. When this first came out, it was also a big deal, because people thought that, oh, well, if I just had unprotected sex, I can have this pill anytime I want. It does not work like that. This is meant for emergencies only, and women have to go to their doctors at this point to get it. Now it is sold by pharmacists, so the woman does not have to go to the doctor for privacy reasons, but at the same time, there is a list that you have to sign, like when you buy a pseudoephedrine, and you have to sign this list, and if you sign this list and you are in the system more than so many times a year, then at that point, then you will have some officials come and speak to you from the FDA. This is a big deal. Up to this point, when we started talking about sex in the schools, which was in the early 80s, they did the sex abstinence only education. In this study, in these studies, there were quite a few actually, showed that the abstinence only sex education does not work. I repeat, it does not work. You have to teach the children about everything about the sex, from contraceptions to how to prevent pregnancies, to different positions, to things that are enjoyable about it, about the ST, everything. They found that scare tactics don't work. This is another contraception pill. This was when you were only having anywhere from 3 to 5 periods a year. This was thought to dysregulate the woman's cycle, but what they found was basically you had your pack of 4-week pills, and the first 3 weeks they just extended it so it didn't affect the body any more than you already were because you were taking birth control. And then there's another one about abortion, and basically it just says, yeah, it's right, keep doing it because women have rights to their own bodies. That 2007 was when children started getting vaccine for the HPV virus. Because that was a new virus, I need to make a note. If you were also allowed to get it, the book says 9 to 12 years old, but you were allowed to get it when up to 22 years old, so long as you didn't have certain symptoms or things before that. Like you couldn't be pregnant, you couldn't have been, had certain types of cold sores, things of that nature. But this is something that you could get back then, but not now. This was basically a man that was at one time a female and kept his uterus, and he married a male, and the male got him pregnant with their normal sexual intercourse, and even though he had a penis and he had his breast removed, he was able to conceive a baby because he still had his uterus. That didn't come out in the story until much, much later, by the way. Now, that started in 2008, the first state allowing same-sex marriage. Now there are 30 states that allow same-sex marriage in the United States. That was a big deal when the U.S. Supreme Court did that, being because people saw people who rape children as inhuman, and this is a human rights thing. Even though they violated these children in the most vile ways, they were still human beings, and anything that was injections or things like that was unconstitutional at this point, and declared that. And that is the timeline of the sexual revolution. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. Bye-bye.